Well, I'd like to say thank you all for joining and welcome to our first podcast talking about data transformation. This is Rashid Khan from TAINA Technologies. I'm joined here with Cyrus Daftari from KPMG, Jake Braun from TAINA Technologies, and Rich Kent, also from TAINA Technologies. We may be joined by Jason McGarvey from Deloitte and Touche as well. We would actually like to welcome everyone to listening in on our conversation about data transformation. So the first thing we would like to share is when we talk about data transformation, what is data transformation? Well, it's the process of converting the data that you have in-house from one format to another format. And typically this can be done through many types of processes. Most of them are incorporated within our world in what was referred to as an ETL process, which is extract, transform, and load. Cyrus, what are some of the ways that you would talk about or describe data transformation from your standpoint?
Sure. I think obviously, Rashid, when you're talking about putting in a new software, you need to look at data, I think, from two lenses. The first really is from a point going forward. So whatever your new operational process is, how are you going to manage that? Whether it's new accounts in our world or whether it's something, but have a starting point from this point going forward, how are we going to manage it? Of course, that's probably a lot easier because you're able then to define what the data parameters are. You're able to define where your sources are, and you're able to, if you will, transform the data or manipulate the data in a meaningful way that the software can pick it up and run with it. The challenge really is the historical data, right? The historical data, more often than not, needs to be enriched. And the reason why it needs to be enriched, if you just look at our world and you look at how the W8s have changed or how KYC has changed over time, we've added new data elements. And those data elements may not have existed 3 years ago, 5 years ago. When you think about it, Chapter 4 status, Chapter 3 status, that's something relatively new to the new W8s and the original W8s, for example, if you didn't have those. So, enriching data then is something that one has to embark upon. And you have to really think, is it worth that exercise? And if you do believe it's worth that exercise, you're going to have a process whereby you're able to, take a look at what are the data elements, take a look at what you have, and, effectively come up with a mechanism that you're able to, if you will, come up with deduction logic or edit that data so it can fit your new paradigm and flow going forward. So, there's always, I think, some tension between the historical data versus, if you will, the new data, but it's important to do it. And one of the things I will say, particularly with historical data, it's always important to understand how and who can manipulate that data, because what happens oftentimes, I see people do a data mapping exercise, but what they're not necessarily sensitive to is the different parts of the business that could potentially edit that data. So you think you've mapped it appropriately from one angle, but then the next thing you know, that data somehow has been, if you will, changed or edited unbeknownst to if you will, those trying to manage the system end to end, and you're starting to get, if you will, inconsistent results. So that's the other thing, I think, just making sure you appreciate how the data, ebbs and flows, who could touch the data, and ensuring that the data will fit your new quote unquote BAU paradigm, based off the software enhancements you've made.
Yep. And Rich, from your standpoint as the Chief Technology Officer at TAINA, you deal with a lot of data transformation, having data come into various processes. What do you see as being some of the aspects of data transformation and things that people should be aware of?
Well, I guess the main one would be data quality, of course. Having consistent rules, those, I think Cyrus mentioned, rules change over time. So we've been through data transformation a number of times at TAINA with several clients, and data quality is the biggest problem by a long way. So, we spend a lot of time analyzing the data and making sure that we transform it such that it's cleaner coming out the other side. We spend a lot of time working with our clients, and they use the adoption of TAINA as an excuse almost to go through a data cleansing exercise. So data quality is the first big problem. One that we're seeing more and more is the volume of data. Data is cheap to store, storage is cheap. So we're actually seeing quite a large increase in the volume of data that we need to extract, transform, and load. So that's an interesting trend that is, continuing on an upward spiral. Security is another consideration that is often forgotten in data transformation. We have to be, and we are absolutely paranoid about security and data security. And so we spend a lot of time making sure that when we're going through analysis phases with our customers, that the data is always secure. And that is one consideration that people do tend to overlook. But it's one that we're very keen on ensuring we adopt the highest standards. And from a development perspective, there are a number of very low-level sort of challenges as a developer. Extracting the data, managing duplicates, managing the rules. All of our customers have different rules. Mapping of data from one company's perspective to our sort of standard platform. So it's a challenge. It's a real challenge, but exciting at the same time.
Yep. That's good to know. Some things that we should take into account and think about it, especially security. It's not something even in my former life, I've ever thought of when considering data transformation, which brings us right into some of the struggles with data transformation. Here are some of the things that we have outlined. Jake, you've actually worked in various institutions and have looked at transforming or putting your data into various software, whether they be homegrown or purchased from a vendor. What are some of the things that you have seen in struggling to get that data incorporated into those new processes? Jake, you're on mute.
I have to echo what Cyrus and Rich have said. Data quality. This stuff has been accumulating for eons, and it's often bad, outdated. On the other hand, sometimes you have lost data history because things have just been overwritten. So getting that data quality up to speed is a tremendous effort, and I think Cyrus said it. It's not worth the effort to try and get historical stuff in any. You can't make sense of some of it. You have old addresses that don't mean anything. You have old characteristics from KYC and from tax that are no longer valid. You have to enrich the data. So that, to me, that was the main point. I would point out data privacy is an issue. You're often bringing data in from multiple jurisdictions, and now in this world we have today, you have to be very, very careful on how that data is aggregated, who can see it. So that's a big problem. And sometimes you're normalizing the data. You've got multiple databases that may have fields that are named in different ways and have they have the same name but different type of data. So there's a lot of that. It's just cleanup is a tremendous effort, and the question is it worth it? And I agree with Rich. This is often an opportunity for institutions to say, there's a lot of garbage here. Let's clean it out, and that takes a lot of time.
So let's think about that in the data cleansing process. What are, Cyrus, from your standpoint, what are some of the best practices that institutions can do in order to ensure that they do that data cleansing is done properly?
Well, I think the first thing I'd say, Rashid, is make it a part of your test plans. I think more often than not, people buy software and they want to plug it in and they want to use it. But it's not like buying, if you will, a DVD player, VCR. I realize they're a bit obsolete now, but people thought, oh, just plug it in and it's going to work. You do need to have a plan around the data, and you need to have a plan on how are you going to, if you will, incrementally bring that in. And do you flip the switch, and do you have a methodology that you're going to use something going forward and you'll just incorporate it, or are you going to, as Jake alluded to, bring some of it in, some of it you don't bring in? So I would say part of it is really incorporating it into your test plan, and then really understanding from whoever your software provider is, what is the data dictionary, making sure you understand the values as well, because unfortunately, even field lengths, I mean, you think that you've got your legacy name, for example, in your books and records, and maybe the field lengths don't correspond with the software. I mean, we saw that with the IRS, as they were trying to deal with their portal, right? I mean, they didn't have the name field length long enough for us, and particularly, for example, with fund clients as an example. So it's really important in my mind to A, have a part of your test plan, B, make sure that you understand, if you will, quote unquote, the data dictionary, and understand, if you will, the parameters for each one of the data components that you're bringing in.
Yeah, I think that the data dictionary concept is something that people take for granted, especially when you're thinking about financial institutions in today's world, or other type of institutions that dealing with client data. Most institutions, they have various different segments and arms, and that data is stored in different formats, different attributes. The data dictionary allows for you to identify where those differences occur and how to normalize that information, so that this way it can be incorporated into a single software or into a single instance of software naturally. And something that we think about from our standpoint as we're speaking to our clients is, what are those variations? What are those differences? And how do we get over the hurdle of being able to put that into a single format?
Yeah, and if I can just give an example, Rashid, just take something as simple as countries, right? Most organizations use the ISO countries, right? But for us in the information withholding reporting world, from an IRS perspective, we got to have the 1042S country code, right? The two countries don't, if you will, link up together. And so what's interesting oftentimes is your name and address book or your CRM tool may or may not use ISO countries, right? And then how do you then have a mapping from the ISO country to a 1042S country? So, there's something that basic that we take for granted, or you may have hardwired your own system to recognize a 1042S country, but when you're mapping over to a vendor tool, did they do it? So, sometimes even things that we think are going to be consistent can go amok, and you don't realize it unless you really follow, the end-to-end, or if you will, the life cycle of that data element. How do you get it from account opening all the way to how do you put it on 1042S? And did it change anywhere along the data journey, if you will?
And Rich, before we move on to the next slide, the question for you is around, when we think about data dictionary standard import type of process, what's the type of work that you see is necessary from a technology standpoint to ensure that the data that is coming in is actually in line with your expectations? Do you work with clients on their data dictionary? Do you build a customized data dictionary for that process? What are some of the things that you do?
Absolutely. Well, first things first, before we go to that, I think the very first challenge and point that needs to be considered is what does success of data migration look like in data transformation? And that's something that's often overlooked. Are you, as you go into the project, are you looking for 100% success rate? Or are you happy, for example, with an 80-20 type approach? And we see different customers have different approaches. So being clear on what success looks like is really important. But then to your point, absolutely. We, within the TAINA platform, we have our own rules of what the data needs to conform to. And we would always work on like a one-to-one basis with our customers to generate a mapping and document the mapping, because each of our customers' data is very, very different, and so we have to work almost on a bespoke basis with them to be crystal clear and to document what the software rules should be. And the other point I'd like to make is I think there's 2 points. One, we need to make sure that our software provides very clear and very detailed feedback when you're going through that loading process and the transformation process. I've seen software, will say, hey, the dates failed, but why did the dates fail? Is it because they were in the EU format and they need to be in the US format? Were they, future dates? So really providing really detailed feedback on exactly why this data didn't load is super important. And the other important point is you must have the ability to iterate quickly. Because data transformations are not one-off processes. You must iterate, and you must be able to iterate quickly. So, for example, the TAINA platform can ingest hundreds of thousands of records in a matter of minutes, and that ability to iterate really, really helps when you're going through these projects.
Great. So coming up, that brings us to best practices, right? And just coming back to you, Rich. Do you think at any point in time there could be an industry standard for how we would actually execute data transformation?
I think that would be an absolutely fantastic idea. Everybody has legacy systems, but I think if moving forward we could agree a common industry standard for the data and migrate over time, it wouldn't be an easy exercise, but I think the benefits would be phenomenal if we had industry standards, just like TAINA's doing with the withholding statements. That would be absolutely phenomenal. I think everybody would pay dividends, and it would facilitate an reallocation of effort onto more productive projects rather than spending a lot of time on data.
Yeah, and Jake, from your standpoint, when we think about best practices, what would be your advice to a lot of operational teams out there on how to prepare to integrate into new software?
Well, the first thing is, if our problem is always coordination, because the responsibility for data can be fragmented among different parts of the organization. You've got different business lines, you have different technology teams, you have different operational teams. So making sure you've got the right people involved in the planning ahead of time is absolutely critical. And that you have buy-in from all of those different teams. Now, I think that's really spending time on the project management, getting the right people in place, pays dividends down the road.
Great. And Cyrus, any closing comments or thoughts from your side, things that you think about in your role at KPMG?
I mean, at the end of the day, data is key in our world, right? I mean, from information withholding and reporting, it starts with good documentation. When you think about our process, it's due diligence, withholding, reporting, right? So you got to get it right up front, and if you don't get it right up front, you're going to have a problem when it goes down to do reporting. And as the IRS, changes rules and we're being asked to do more with less resources, having better data is really important, and looking at ways, whether it's bots or RPAs or other ways to improve your data, it's definitely, I think, a worthwhile exercise. I mean, I know, reporting has just been more and more complicated, over the years, and just, I think if you're able to get that data in good shape, it does make for a better process and allows people to review and be a little more proactive on the quality of the information returns that they're generating, as opposed to reacting and trying to manipulate and just meet the deadline because you pushed it out the door, but you're spending all your time fixing data issues as opposed to looking for substantive quality issues. And when audits come, I mean, the IRS clearly is focusing more and more on the information returns and the quality of the data on the information returns, and they're giving people penalties for wrong codes and things like that. So I do think it's worth the investment in time to say, how do I enrich, how do I improve the data? Data's never easy, it's never fun, but it's definitely a worthwhile exercise.
No, and that's an interesting. That is a great point. To just add to that is data transformation does not always encompass just software integration. When you're thinking about creating electronic files to the IRS or to regulatory bodies, there is a level of data transformation that has to occur in order to get that into the standardized formats that they're expecting. And they have no problem with rejecting your files and fining you for a rejected file just because you did not understand or adopt to a change that they have made in their process. So I'd like to thank you all for joining and for participating in our first podcast. This will be the first of a series that we're planning on putting together. And we hope that anyone who is listening and joining us for these podcasts enjoy the content and the substance. If you have any recommendations or ideas around things you'd like to hear about in the future, we welcome those comments. Thank you.
Thank you.
I would like to thank our panelists. You can read more about them in the presentation that will be attached on our website. Additionally, you can visit us at www.taina.tech for more information about news and upcoming events related to TAINA. Additionally, information about our partners can be accessed through the websites below. Thank you.